Hey folks, Max here, and in this episode of Great Levels in Gaming, we're taking a look at Cocoon from Final Fantasy XIII, which was developed and published by Square Enix and which saw its international release in the spring of 2010. In case you're wondering why the first Final Fantasy I'm taking a look at is this one and not one of the other huge classics in the series, there's a very specific reason for it. Final Fantasy XIII gets a lot of flack from the Final Fantasy fanbase for its very linear first 20 or so hours spent in Cocoon, one of the game's two primary environments, and I actually think that the environmental design is both interesting and important to what the game is trying to achieve within its narrative. The result is going to be an episode of my series that stretches the definition of what constitutes a level in a game almost to its breaking point, but hopefully I've earned enough goodwill from my previous videos that you'll bear with me here because I feel very strongly about this aspect of the game's design. Now, effective game and level design can allow a developer to instill in you a particular emotional response through smart use of the game's mechanics, writing, or aesthetics. Two of the most common emotions that a game might be designed to elicit are happiness and fear, the latter having an entire genre of games dedicated to that single emotional response. Ultimately, however, both of these can be distilled to a more general feeling of making you, the player, feel excitement while playing the game, which is a very effective tool for establishing player engagement. This is what drives your involvement in the game. If you're invested in the events on screen, that translates to immersion in the game, be it in the gameplay, atmosphere, or story. There are, however, other feelings besides excitement that can drive engagement in a game, as we'll look at here. Anyone who has been stuck on a particularly difficult moment in a game can attest to how engaging it can be to be challenged and frustrated. Think about the hardest or most frustrating section of a game that you can recall. Up to a point, that desire to overcome that challenge can compel you to keep on playing. Sometimes this can be overwhelming to the point at which you feel the need to step away from the game, but before that is something of a sweet spot in which the challenge itself sucks you into the game to prove that you can conquer it. In fact, there are many games that are beloved by their fans specifically because they pose such a challenge. The feeling of accomplishment at overcoming a difficult obstacle is something that we're biologically tuned to enjoy, so it's entirely natural that these types of games are both fun and rewarding. At its core, Final Fantasy XIII seems to me to be designed around this feeling of overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, both in terms of gameplay and environmental design, and nowhere is the latter more on display than in Cocoon. Again, one of the chief complaints about the level design in Final Fantasy XIII is that its linearity stifles the player freedom inherent to role-playing games, especially previous entries in the Final Fantasy series. You'll notice the mini-map in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and it frequently displays a narrow path with very little room for deviation, essentially funneling you down a constricted trail to the next area. Though first impressions of this lack of player choice might make you feel like it hurts the game, I want to pose a counter-argument here, and that requires a little understanding of the themes present within the game's story. For those who haven't played Final Fantasy XIII, don't worry, I will avoid spoilers and instead focus on the more overarching ideas that inform the game's story and design. In the world of Final Fantasy XIII, there are beings known as fal'Cie, which are functionally demigods, and a group of them protects the artificial world of Cocoon from the wild lower world of Pulse. These fal'Cie have the ability to mark humans as their servants, called l'Cie, who are granted power and the ability to wield magic, but are doomed to become crystalline zombies known as Seath should they not complete the task or focus that the fal'Cie set for them. Legend states, however, that they will be granted eternal life as crystals should they succeed at completing their focus. This theme of fate versus free will stands at the heart of the game's narrative, as the members of the main party are branded as Pulse l'Cie, supposed enemies of Cocoon, within the first couple hours of the game. Additionally, as the immediately established dichotomy between Cocoon and Pulse would suggest, the party's journey takes them across Cocoon and eventually to Pulse. Cocoon's linearity is then not only necessary to appreciate Pulse's openness to the fullest, but is actually very strong level design in its own right as it reflects the character's frustration at feeling trapped by their focus. The environments in Cocoon mirror the lack of choice with which the party is faced, and the frustration that you may feel while playing through these areas is the exact same frustration that the l'Cie themselves are facing. The game actually uses the level design to project the cast's feelings onto you, the player, and thus makes it easier to identify and sympathize with the party. Additionally, it makes sense within the context of the story, as Cocoon is an artificial world created by the fal'Cie. Everything in it is mapped, controlled, and known, so free exploration isn't something that would really make any sense there. The small side paths that contain items reinforce this. Any semblance of freedom in Cocoon is an illusion, so while the people of Cocoon may feel that they are free to live their lives how they choose, any of them can be branded as a l'Cie at a moment's notice, nullifying their freedom completely. Also worth briefly noting is that many of these side paths feature tougher groups of enemies than the main route. Because the party's health is restored after every encounter, the game is balanced such that a tougher enemy encounter than average has the potential to wipe your party very quickly. This comes to the fore especially in the side quests on Pulse, but in these side paths it serves to support the theme that, in Cocoon, any attempt at true freedom is met with fierce resistance. The next point that I'd like you to consider is how effectively the level design in Cocoon reinforces the urgency of the party's task. If Cocoon were designed to be as open and free as Pulse, with side quests and areas to explore all around, it would undermine the drama and tension that the story aims to create. How many times has a game posed a mission as vital and immediately necessary only to present you with numerous side objectives that you can leisurely complete before finally getting around to the main quest? You would likely find the character's behavior completely incomprehensible if, on one hand, they exclaim how trapped they feel by the immediate necessity of their objective, then on the other they just turn around and ignore it to explore a great wide open world full of side quests to complete. It would be completely counter to the game's design. The differences between Cocoon and Pulse play a significant role in the level design of each as well. From very early on, Final Fantasy XIII establishes a stark contrast between the two worlds, painting Cocoon as calm, safe, and ordered, while depicting Pulse as wild and dangerous. Once again, this is reflected in the environmental design, as even the unpopulated areas in Cocoon, such as the sunlit waterscape, are still contained and linear. In the moment when you leave for Pulse, the party has finally banded together and agreed with one mind to fight their focus and work to forge their own path, fighting for their freedom. In keeping with this, Pulse is designed to be as open and free as possible to reinforce this idea. If Cocoon was as open as some of the game's detractors wish it was, this newfound freedom would be completely undermined and diluted, since the freedom in the gameplay would be nothing new. The contrast between the worlds is entirely necessary for the story's events and themes to be meaningful, so Cocoon's linearity helps to make this contrast as plain and clear as possible. Worth noting is that even their names fit their characteristics and stand in opposition to one another. A cocoon by definition is enclosed and finite, whereas a pulse expands outward, reaching further. It's a neat little touch by the developers that I feel makes it a bit easier to recognize and appreciate the choices in level design. Ultimately, however, whether or not you like Cocoon's design is entirely up to you. Its linearity differentiates it from other environments in the Final Fantasy series, and while there is a large contingent of fans who dislike this change, I happen to enjoy what it does to support the themes established by the game's story. I feel that it's notable and worthwhile that Final Fantasy XIII doesn't make concessions for a particular style of play that would diminish the meaning of the story, which is important for games to be accepted as the art form that they are. I hope that this video might have made you think about the game's world in a different way, and that you might find that you see things differently than you did before. Thanks for watching. Final Fantasy XIII is a more divisive game than some, and I take a stance on it that I'd like to see more, so it's something that was important to me to include here. I hope that you'll share your opinions in the comments, and join me next time when I take a look at another great level in gaming.